Good morning, everyone. Today our topic is protein energy malnutrition. Okay. So what exactly is protein energy malnutrition? It's a cellular imbalance between the supply of nutrients and energy and the body's demand for them to ensure growth, maintenance, and specific functions. Protein energy malnutrition applies to a group of related disorders that include marasmus-Kwashiorkor and intermediate state of marasmus-Kwashiorkor. It's better to use the terminology of severe childhood undernutrition. And it can be because of two reasons. One can be primary, one can be secondary. Primary is when it occurs due to reduced intake, and secondary is when it occurs due to increased needs, decreased absorption, or increased losses. In this aspect, it is also important to understand the term failure to thrive. It means it is applicable for all those children less than 5 years of age whose physical growth is significantly less than their peers of same age and sex. So for that, the child's weight has to be below third centile. There should be failure to gain weight over a period of time, and the rate of growth should have crossed two major centiles. So as we can see in this particular growth chart, where the child was following one centile, and then the growth starts faltering, because of which it crosses two centiles. So this is failure to thrive. This can again be because of organic causes or and non-organic or psychosocial causes. So these are some common anthropometric criteria that we can use to diagnose failure to thrive. Body mass index for age less than fifth centile, length for age less than fifth centile, weight deceleration crossing two major percentile lines, weight for age less than the fifth percentile, weight less than 75% of the median weight for age, weight less than 75% of the median weight for length, and weight velocity less than fifth percentile. So these are the various anthropometric criteria that we can use to diagnose failure to thrive. Now, it is also important to understand that malnutrition and infection, they often coexist, and they create a vicious cycle where they tend to exacerbate each other. Because of infection, a child will tend to have reduced appetite, so there will be reduced food intake. Infection can also cause malabsorption of nutrients, and it can also cause metabolic losses, which will result in undernutrition. Whenever there is undernutrition, the phagocytic and bactericidal activities are reduced. Cell-mediated immune response will be suppressed. Even humoral immune response will also be affected. Secretory IgA levels will be low, and antibody responses overall will be reduced. And also it will affect the complement system. And also within the leukocytes, the lysozyme levels will be decreased. So because of all these, there will be immunosuppression, which will predispose to infection. So infection, on the other hand, will exacerbate undernutrition. So this entire thing will worsen in a vicious cycle. So now let's look at the spectrum of PEM. How will a child with PEM manifest? It can manifest in the form of Kwashiorkor, which appears usually at around 12 months when breastfeeding is discontinued, but it can appear anytime. And it consists of the triad of growth retardation, edema, and mental changes. It can also result in marasmus, where there is wasting. Sometimes there can be presence of features of both. They were resulting in known as marasmic Kwashiorkor. Sometimes the child may not have manifestations as severe as Kwashiorkor, but so in that case, we call it pre-Kwashiorkor. It can manifest like a nutritional dwarfing or bonsai children. The child can simply be underweight, and there is also something called as invisible PEM. So now let's look at the various spectrum ones. So here we consider what is the body weight as percentage of the standard for that age, whether edema is present, and how much is the deficit in weight for height. So suppose there is a child whose body weight is 60 to 80% of the standard for that age, which is nothing but the 50th percentile for that age. And the child has edema also, and the deficit is there in weight for height, then it will result in what is known as Kwashiorkor. In marasmus, on the other hand, there will be no edema, and the body weight will be less than 60% of the standard for that age, and there will be severe deficit in weight for height. So that is marasmus. And when you combine the features of marasmus and Kwashiorkor, it will result in what is known as marasmic Kwashiorkor. So in marasmic Kwashiorkor, the weight will be less than 60% of the standard for that age. Edema will be present and deficit will be there in weight for height, and that will be severe. So needless to say, marasmic Kwashiorkor is the most severe among these three. What is nutritional dwarfing? In nutritional dwarfing, there will be no deficit in weight for height. The child will just be stunted without any wasting, and there will be no edema. So as a result of that, what will happen? The body weight will be less than 60% of the standard for that age, but the height will also be proportionately reduced. So there will be no deficit in weight for height, and there will be no edema. So that is nutritional dwarfing. And what exactly is underweight? Underweight is the least severe of all these. It's nothing but when the child is having a weight between 60 to 80% of the standard, there is no edema and there is moderate deficit in weight for height. So this is the spectrum of PEM. So whenever a child comes to us with protein energy malnutrition, there are certain factors that we need to assess when we are assessing that child. One is complete dietary assessment. Then we also need to look at the clinical features, detailed anthropometric assessment. And apart from these, certain investigations will also help us, like certain biochemical parameters, morphological parameters, certain radiological parameters. And definitely last but not the least, the epidemiological data, where the child hails from, what is the nutritional status of children, other children in that area. So all those things are important. What are the diseases endemic in that area? What is immunization coverage, etc. That also is very important for holistic treatment of the child. So how do we do a dietary assessment? By 24-hour recall method. Accuracy is increased if you take average of 3 days recall during midweek, and this happens to be the most appropriate method when you assess the dietary intake in a child with PEM. There is another method called the food frequency table, where you just record the frequency intake of each food item after defining standard servings of each. Also, you can do by weighing the uncooked and cooked food, but needless to say, it's a cumbersome method, and also by asking about the detailed feeding practices. Among all these, it is the 24-hour recall method which is the most accurate. So now let's come on to clinical assessment. There are certain signs that you should look for in a child with malnutrition. So what are the signs? Certain hair signs like hypochromotrichia, which means hypopigmented hair. The hair will also tend to be easily pluckable. There will be straightening of the hair, and the texture will also become altered. So there will be a dull, straight hair, which is hypopigmented and also easily pluckable. And sometimes when periods of undernutrition and proper nutrition intervene, then in that case, what will happen? You will see that there will be alternating areas of hypopigmentation and normal pigmentation, which will give rise to what is known as flax sign. Okay, so now let's look at what are the various skin changes that can happen. There is something called flaky pain dermatosis, and flaky pain dermatosis, as you can see in this child, there will be areas which will be hyperpigmented, and there will be areas which will be hypopigmented like this. So this hypopigmented area is nothing but when the hyperpigmented skin, it gets denuded, thereby exposing the hypopigmented underlying skin. So this is known as flaky paint dermatosis. It is as if flakes of paint are coming off from the wound. There is something called crazy pavement dermatosis, in which like you can see something as like it will be something like this. There will be alternating small patches of hypo and hyperpigmented areas. Definitely you have to look for evidence of secondary infections in the form of impetigo, furuncles, carbuncles. Cutaneous diphtheria can also occur. The skin may become dried up, thereby resulting in cirrhosis. Follicular hyperkeratosis can also occur, and also you have to look for manifestations of pellagra. In the face, you can find depigmentation, moon phases, that is because of adrenal insufficiency that sets in, and noma. Noma is nothing but gangrenous infections that causes erosion of the underlying tissues, as you can see in this chart. Okay, so what are the eye signs? Definitely there will be pallor if you look at the palpebral conjunctiva. And you have to look for features of vitamin E deficiency in the form of vital spots and also conjunctival and corneal cirrhosis. And definitely needless to say, you also have to look for keratomalacia, where the cornea will get softened up. And eventually the most dangerous form is when the cornea gets liquefied, and then that will result in perforation of the eyeball. So the earliest sign will be Bitot spots, and it is extremely important to look for the signs of vitamin A deficiency in the eyes in a child with malnutrition. In the lips, you can find evidence of angular stomatitis, angular scars, and also cheilosis. The tongue may appear to be edematous. There may be loss of papillae that results in bald tongue, and also the color of the tongue may become scarlet or raw. In teeth, you may find mottling of the enamel, and the gums may also appear spongy and they may bleed. This is because of vitamin C deficiency. Thyroid and parotid swelling can occur, and in nails, you need to look for evidence of koilonychia, platinichia, and leukonychia. In subcutaneous tissue, definitely there will be gross reduction of the subcutaneous fat, which will give rise to a wrinkled appearance. And in case of a child who is having washiorkor, edema can be present. The various musculoskeletal signs include wasting, craniotabes, frontoparietal bossing, epiphyseal enlargement or tenderness, beating of ribs, wide open fontanelli, knock knees, bow legs, thoracospinal deformities, and bleeds. Most of these are due to vitamin D deficiency, that is rickets, and some are due to vitamin C deficiency. And in the gastrointestinal tract, you may get fatty liver, and you may get hepatomegaly, and also there will be evidence of lactose intolerance in the form of perianal rashes. Neurologically, there can be varied manifestations in the form of psychomotor changes. The child may be irritable, as you can see here, apathic. The child it will be a dull child who is not interested in the surroundings. It can even lead to confusion. There can be sensory neuropathy, thereby resulting in sensory loss. There can be motor neuropathy, thereby resulting in motor weakness, also because of decreased muscle tone, because of associated electrolyte imbalance, and also vitamin D deficiency. Then loss of proprioception, loss of ankle and knee jerks can also be present. Cuff tenderness can be present. Child may even manifest tremors. And in cardiovascular system, there can be cardiomegaly and tachycardia. And in the various serous cavities, you may find effusion like pleural effusion, ascites, etc. And that is because of hypoalbuminemia. So now it's extremely important to differentiate between marasmus and washiorkor. Keep this typical appearance in mind. Marasmus is when the child will be having it occurs when there is balanced starvation. That is, there is proportionate reduction in both calorie and protein intake. And as a result of which the child appears to be severely wasted. The child will be emaciated and stunted. And the weight for age Z scores will be very low. And typically the child will have an old man faces with wrinkled appearance and sparse hair. There will be no edema, there will be no fatty liver, there will be no skin changes, which are usually present in a child with washiorkor. It usually occurs in children who are less than 2 years of age, and that happens when there is reduction in the intake of breast milk or complementary food. Washiorkor, on the other hand, occurs when the calorie intake is not that less, but the protein intake is severely reduced. As a result of which, there is tendency for hypoalbuminemia that causes edema. So these children will be having edema. As you can see in this child, the child has periorbital edema, the child has pedal edema, and also ascites. So these children will be having edema. They will be having mental changes, hair changes, fatty liver, and also various skin lesions. They're very prone for developing various kinds of infection. The weight for age scores, Z scores, will be moderately low because there is some amount of edema present that masks the wasting. And this, among these two, washiorkor happens to have very high case fatality, but the prevalence happens to be low. And usually it is in the first to third years of life, but it can occur at any age. Now let's come on to the anthropometric assessment. How do we do anthropometric assessment? We look at the weight for age, height for age, weight for height, also the head circumference and the chest circumference. So weight for age, if it is low, then it is suggestive of, it may be either acute or chronic malnutrition. If the height for age is low, it means that there is chronic malnutrition. But if the weight for height is low, it means that there is acute malnutrition. And among all these things, except for the weight for height, the others are all age independent indices. Only weight for height is age independent. It means that if you know the age of the child, then you can apply this age dependent variables. But many of the times it may happen that the mother may not be able to tell you the age of the child. So in that case, in order to assess the nutritional status, you need to apply certain age independent indices, one of which is weight for height. So now let's look at the various classifications of malnutrition. So there are certain classification systems which use the weight for age, and that includes the IAP classification, Wellcome Trust classification, Gomez classification, and also the Gillis classification. On the other hand, there are certain classification systems that use the weight for height and the height for age. So these include the Waterloo classification and the WHO classification. So what exactly is the IAP classification? The IAP classification says that you check the weight of the child for age, and then also you express it as percentage of the standard weight for that age. That is, if you plot in the growth chart, then the weight of the 50th centile for that age is considered to be the standard. So you have the weight of the 50th centile of the Harvard standard as per that age, and also the weight for age of that child. And you try to express the percentage, try to express the weight for age of that child as percentage of the weight of the 50th centile of Harvard standard. And then you see what the percentage comes out to be. Accordingly, you classify. If it is more than 80%, then it's normal. If it is 71 to 80%, then it is grade 1. If it is 61 to 70%, then it is grade 2 malnutrition. If it is 51 to 60, then it is grade 3 malnutrition. And if it is less than 50, then it is grade 4 malnutrition. So that was the IAP classification. Now let's move on to the Wellcome Trust classification. Here we consider what is the weight for age expressed as percentage of the expected weight for that age, and also whether there is presence or absence of edema. So suppose there's a child whose weight is 60 to 80% of the standard, but the child does not have any edema, then it is underweight. If the child has a weight for age which is 60 to 80% of the standard but has edema, then it becomes washiorkor. Similarly, suppose there is a child who has weight for age less than 60% and there is no edema, then it is marasmus. But if the weight for age is less than 60% for the standard and the child also has edema, then it combines the features of both marasmus and washiorkor and it becomes marasmic washiorkor. So that is the Wellcome Trust classification for you. Then comes the Gomez classification, where again we base the classification according to what percentage the weight for age of the child is as compared to the expected for that age. So if it is more than 90%, it is normal. If it is 75 to 90%, it is first degree. It is 60 to 75%, it is second degree. Less than 60%, it is third degree. Now let's look at two other classification systems, that is Waterloo classification and the WHO. The Waterloo classification, it assesses the weight for height and also the height for age. Suppose a child is there, normally the weight for height should be more than -2 standard deviation. And also the height for age should be more than -2 standard deviation. If that is so, then that child is normal. Suppose there is a child whose weight for height is normal, that is more than -2 standard deviation, but the height for age is less than -2 standard deviation. That means the child doesn't have any wasting, but the child has only stunting. So it is stunted. Again, if there's a child who has weight for height less than -2 standard deviation, that is the child has wasting, but the height for age is normal, then that means the child has only wasting. But if a child has weight for height less than -2 and the height for age is also less than -2, that means the child is both stunted and wasted. Then let's move on to the WHO classification, where they will consider only the height for age and the weight for height. So they call it stunting if the height for age is less than 90% or is less than -2 z-score, and severe stunting if it is less than 85% or less than -3 z-score. And weight for height, if it is less than 80% or less than -2 z-score, then it is wasting. And if it is less than 70% or less than -3 z-score, then it is severe wasting. So as you can see, this is just an example. Suppose there's a 4-year-old child whose weight is 12 kg. Then you simply plot it along the graph. So 4 years and the child is having 12 kg weight. So it comes here. So this means that the child's weight for age is between -2 to -3 z-score. So that means the child is, we don't know till now. We have to assess what is the height for age and what is the weight for height. And then accordingly, we should understand whether it is only wasting or whether it is only stunting or whether it is wasting and stunting both. So now let's look at some of the age independent indicators. As I had told before, age independent indicators are important when you don't know the age of the child. The mother is not able to tell you the age of the child, but still you want to assess the nutritional status. So in that case, the age independent indicators are the ones that will help you out. Most important is the mid upper arm circumference. So always keep in mind, the mid upper arm circumference increases rapidly in the first year and it reaches a value of around 11 to 16 centimeter and 11 to 16 centimeter, and then it stabilizes between 1 to 5 years of age. So this is used as an age independent indicator between 6 months to 6 years of age. So in a child who is 1 to 5 years of age, it should be more than 13.5 centimeter to be normal. Ideally, it is around 16 to 17 centimeter. If it is between 12.5 to 13.5, then we consider it as borderline. If it is less than 12.5, then we consider it as wasting. And if it is less than 11 centimeter, then we call it severe wasting. So basically, this is nothing but this is assessing the muscle bulk and also the subcutaneous fat. Okay. So definitely, if there is wasting, then what will happen? There will be loss of muscle bulk and there will be loss of subcutaneous tissue. So the mid upper arm circumference will be less. So normally it should be 16 to 17. It should be at least 13.5. If it is between 12.5 to 13.5, it is borderline. If it is less than 12.5 centimeters, it is wasting, and less than 11 centimeters is severe wasting. So quack stick is nothing but it's just a measure of assessing the mid upper arm circumference only. So there is something called a Quaker arm circumference measuring stick. So this is nothing but a stick that is used to measure the height, which also shows the 80th and the 85 centiles of the expected MUSC. And there is something called the Shakir stick that you can see here. So if you check the MUSC and you see that it is falling in the green zone, it means it is adequate. Yellow means borderline and red means frank malnutrition. Skin fold thickness, this is another way of assessing the nutritional status. It's an age-independent indicator, and this basically indicates subcutaneous fat, which is nothing but the calorie reserve of the body. So we use this heart pendant calipers, as you can see here, to assess the subcutaneous fat. I mean the skin fold thickness, which is nothing but the assessment of the subcutaneous fat. It should be more than 10 millimeters. If it is between 6 to 10 millimeters, then it is suggestive of mild malnutrition. And if it is less than 6 millimeters, it is suggestive of severe malnutrition. Ideally, you should use age and gender specific charts to draw proper interpretation. There are certain other indices which you can use. One of them is the Kanavati index, Dugdale index, Ponderal index, and the Rao and Singh index. So the Kanavati index is nothing but the mid upper arm circumference divided by the head circumference. Normally should be more than equal to 0.315. If it is between 0.28 to 0.314, then it is mild PM. If it is between 0.25 to 0.279, moderate PM, and less than equal to 0.249 is severe PM. Dugdale index, on the other hand, is weight divided by height to the power 1.6. It should be more than 0.79. If it is less than 0.79, then it is suggestive of protein energy malnutrition. Ponderal index is a similar index, except for that it is weight divided by height to the power 3 as compared to 1.6 in Dugdale. Normally, it should be more than 2.5. We call it mild PM if it is between 2 to 2.5. Less than 2 is severe PM. And then we have Rao and Singh index, which is weight divided by height square. Normally, it should be more than 0.0015. If it is 0.0013 to 0.0015, it is mild PM. And if it is less than 0.0013, then it is suggestive of severe PM. There are certain biochemical indices also that we can use to assess the nutritional status. One is transferrin level. If it is less than 0.45 mg per ml, then it is indicative of severe malnutrition. Albumin, if it is less than 3 gram per, normally it should be more than 3 gram per dl. It will be less than 3 gram per dl in the early part of the illness. And then as the severity progresses, it will become even lower, and less than 2.5 is definitely pathological. Again, serum prealbumin, transthyretin, and retinol binding protein, these are other indicators. 24-hour urinary 3-methyl histidine excretion is another indicator. And there is something called the urinary creatinine height index. If it is between 0.25 to 0.75, then it is suggestive of washout. In marasmus, usually it lies between 0.33 to 0.85. So now let's see, how do we manage a child with protein energy malnutrition? So usually you can manage them on an OPD basis, but there are certain indicators that will help, if present in the child, you will have to admit the child. What are this? If there is severe wasting, if there is symmetrical edema involving at least the feet, and if the weight for age is less than 60% with diarrhea, shock, hypothermia, systemic infection, jaundice, bleeding, if it's an infant, and also if there is persistent loss of appetite. So now let's look at what is severe malnutrition. Severe malnutrition means when the weight for height or length is less than 70% or is less than 3 standard deviation, when there is visible severe wasting, when there is bipedal edema, or when the mid-upper arm circumference is less than 11 centimeters. So out of these 4, at least 2 will have to be present. So how do we manage such a child? Always keep in mind that such a child's management will be done in 2 phases. One is the initial stabilization phase, and the other is the longer rehabilitation phase. And you should always follow certain principles while managing. That is, you have to do a careful initial evaluation. You should anticipate complications. You should try to prevent the complications. And if once the complications have already started occurring, you should detect them at the earliest and treat them off. Always try to avoid intravenous infusions except when essential, because these children are at an increased risk for infections. And also, you should promote increasing food intake by all available means. So, as I told, there are 2 phases in management. One is the acute stabilization phase, and the other is the rehabilitation phase. So the acute stabilization phase spans over a week. Over the first few days, we try to manage hypoglycemia, hypothermia, dehydration, and the infection we can take care over a week. And we also have to correct electrolyte imbalances, which will start right from day 1, and that can take a long time to get corrected. In the first 1 week, we should give all micronutrients except for iron, because it is also the time when we are treating infection, and iron should not be given when the child is having active infection. After 1 week, when the infection is taken care of, you can start iron. And other micronutrients, you have to start on day 1 itself. Sensory stimulation, you have to provide all throughout. Feeding, you should initiate in the first 1 week. And after 1 week, you have to plan for catch-up growth, to achieve catch-up growth, and hence you have to plan feeds accordingly. So this is the basic principle of management. Now let's look at the individual management of the complications. Yeah. So first is hypoglycemia. It's a very hypoglycemia is present in almost all cases of malnutrition. It can be either asymptomatic or the child may already start having telltale symptoms of hypoglycemia like lethargy, unconsciousness, and seizures. If the child is symptomatic, then you have to give IV 10% dextrose 5 ml per kg, which is then followed by oral or NG feeds with 50 ml of 10% glucose or sucrose solution. If the child is asymptomatic, however, then you need to check the blood sugar. If the blood sugar is less than 54, then you have to go for 50 ml of 10% dextrose or sucrose solution orally or through NG feed. If the blood sugar cannot be tested, then also assume that the blood sugar is less than 54 and give this. And with this, you have to also start antibiotics because infections can cause hypoglycemia. And also you have to start feeding of the child. So you have to keep on feeding the child every 30 minutes for first 2 hours and then 2 hours. Hypothermia, we call it hypothermia when the rectal temperature is less than 35.5 or the axillary temperature is less than 35. So this you can do by providing the child with warm clothes, cover the head of the child, provide kangaroo mother care, keep the child in a draft-free area. That means you have to keep the child away from windows, doors, from AC vents, away from the walls. And also you have to give antibiotics because this triad of antibiotic, hypothermia, and hypoglycemia, they frequently coexist. And yes, most importantly, you have to feed the child in order for the child to be able to maintain the core temperature. So now let's come on to management of dehydration in a child with severe acute malnutrition. So always keep in mind that a child with malnutrition, it is very difficult to assess hydration status in a child who is having severe acute malnutrition. Why? Because the skin target will overestimate. Definitely in a child who is having marasmus, the skin target will be delayed, but that doesn't mean whether the child has dehydration. So you cannot use skin target as a method of assessing dehydration. Also, if in a Washerka child, edema will be present, which will tend to mask hypovolemia. So in these children, more reliable parameters are pulse volume or urine output, pulse volume and urine output, feel of mucosal moistness, and also increased thirst sensation and hypothermia. Any child who is coming to you with watery diarrhea and has severe acute malnutrition, you have to assume that the child has some dehydration to begin with, and you have to treat accordingly. Unless the child is having frank hypovolemic shock, then in that case, it is severe dehydration and you should manage accordingly. So there are certain principles that you have to follow. Do not use the IV route for dehydration except in cases of shock. This will help you in preventing infection. You have to give reduced osmolarity ORS, rehydration fluid, very slowly. So you have to give 5 ml per kg every 30 minutes for the first 2 hours and then 5 to 10 ml per kg per hour for the next 4 to 10 hours. So as you can see, we try to correct it over a span of 6 to 12 hours. Exact amount definitely will depend upon the concurrent losses. If rehydration is required after 6 hours, you have to give starter F75 and you have to use the same volume of starter F75 that you had used for Rizomal. You have to look for signs of overhydration also continuously. So you have to keep on checking the respiratory rate and the pulse rate. If the respiratory rate increases by more than 5 per minute, or if the pulse rate increases by more than 15 per minute, then that means the child is getting overhydrated, and in that case, you have to stop Rizomal immediately and reassess after 1 hour. Breastfeeding needs to be continued all throughout, and whenever possible, you have to initiate refeeding with starter F75 diet. So this is just to give you an idea regarding what is Rizomal. See, standard WHO ORS has glucose 111, sodium 90 milliequivalent per liter, chloride 80, potassium 20, citrate 10, and osmolarity 311. So in these children, we are using Rizomal, which has osmolarity less than the standard WHO ORS. As compared to 311 osmolarity of standard WHO ORS, we are using 240 osmolarity of Rizomal. And how do we reduce that? Chiefly by decreasing the sodium content and also the chloride content. We are increasing the potassium because these children are at an increased risk for developing hypokalemia. Citrate amount remains the same. Okay. And glucose is also more or less same. So chiefly by decreasing the amount of sodium and chloride, we decrease the osmolarity. Potassium we are increasing so that hypokalemia, which occurs very frequently in these children, can be taken care of. So, and how do we manage severe dehydration in a child with severe acute malnutrition? So in that case, you have to use intravenous or intraosseous route. You have to give Ringal with 5% dextrose or half normal saline with 5% dextrose. The rate should be 15 ml per kg per hour for the first hour. You should not use 5% dextrose alone, needless to say. And you should continue monitoring the child every 5 to 10 minutes. And after 1 hour, you have to assess. If there is no improvement in the shock parameters, or rather there is worsening, you should consider septic shock and give IV antibiotics. If there is improvement, that is if the pulse rate slows down, the CFT improves, the blood pressure improves, then you should consider that this shock was because of hypovolemia. So the child was severely dehydrated. So in that case, you can repeat Ringal active 15 ml per kg over 1 hour. So this is the second bolus. This is the first bolus. And then again, after 1 hour, you assess. If the child starts accepting orally, you start ORS. But if the child improves, but the child is still not accepting orally, in that case, you can give ORS 5 to 10 ml per kg per hour through a nasogastric tube. If the child does not tolerate oral or NG fluid, in that case, you have to give IV fluid, but very cautiously. This I'll skip. So now comes infection. Multiple infections are common in children with protein energy malnutrition. Fever is usually not present. Rather, there can be hypothermia associated, and this typical triad of infection, hypothermia, hypoglycemia remains associated. So whenever hypothermia, hypoglycemia is present, you should strictly consider infections and start giving broad spectrum antibiotics in order to provide both gram-positive as well as gram-negative cover. You have to check whether measles vaccination has been done properly. If not, after the child starts having catch-up growth, you have to plan for giving measles vaccine. Also, you should consider malaria and tuberculosis because these two diseases are endemic in our country. And also, while giving antibiotics, when you are choosing the empirical antibiotic, you have to consider what is the local antibiotic policy like which is the most common organisms prevalent in that area, and what are the antibiotics these organisms are likely to respond to. So what we usually do is we give ampicillin, IV or IM for 2 days, oral amoxicillin, or you can give oral amoxicillin for 5 days. So these will provide gram-positive cover and some gram-negative cover. Along with that, you give gentamicin or amikacin, IM or IV for 7 days, which will provide an excellent gram-negative cover. If with these empirical antibiotics, the child fails to improve within 48 hours, then you give IV cefotaxime or ceftriaxone. And definitely you have to take into consideration the local resistant patterns when you are giving empirical antibiotics. For meningitis, you have to perform lumbar puncture and treat with IV cefotaxime plus IV amikacin for 14 to 21 days. For staphylococcal infection, you can add IV gloxycillin. For specific infections, you have to give specific antibiotics. If when you are considering malaria, you should send off a blood film and you have to add antimalarial when the blood film is positive. You do not add antimalarial treatment empirically. Similarly, you do not add anti-tuberculosis treatment empirically. Only when you are suspecting tuberculosis, you should send off investigations for that. And if tuberculosis is diagnosed, then only you should start anti-tuberculous treatment. Electrolyte imbalances also are very commonly present in children with protein energy malnutrition. So there are certain principles that you have to follow when you are treating electrolyte imbalance. Do not treat edema with a diuretic. You should prepare food without adding salt. Sodium is to be used cautiously. You have to treat hypokalemia, and hypomagnesemia also is present very frequently. In that case, you have to use 50% Maxalt. You should give it IM at 0.3 ml per kg up to a maximum of 2 ml. And after that, after correction, you can follow it up with maintenance, which is given at the dose of 0.4 to 0.6 millimoles per kg daily orally. And suppose you don't have an oral Maxalt preparation, you can use injection magnesium sulfate and give it orally also. So How do you correct micronutrient deficiencies? You should keep on giving micronutrient supplements daily for at least 2 weeks. Not supplements, this is correction dose only, so therapeutic. Multivitamins should be given at twice normal maintenance. Vitamin A should be given on day 1. Folic acid is to be given at the dose of 1 milligram per day, but you will give 5 mg on day 1, followed by 1 milligram per day. Zinc is to be given at the dose of 2 mg per kg per day, copper at the dose of 0.3 mg per kg per day, and iron at the dose of 3 mg per kg per day. But iron definitely you have to give it only after week 1, that is after the child is free of infection. Now refeeding. This is an extremely important thing. You should start feeding as soon as possible with a diet that contains osmolarity less than 350, because they may have secondary lactose intolerance. They may have their like in a child with malnutrition, the renal concentration mechanism may also not be up to the mark. So in that case, if you give a feed with high osmolarity, they can tend to have hypernatremic dehydration. So osmolarity needs to be less than 350 milliosmol per liter. Lactose should not be more than 2 to 3 grams per kg per day. We need to provide a feed which will give appropriate renal solute load, urinary osmolarity less than 600. Initial percentage of calories from protein should be 5%. We have to provide micronutrients with adequate bioavailability. Food should be low viscosity, easy to prepare, and socially acceptable. And also, there should be adequate storage facilities for cooking and refrigeration. So we start feeding as soon as possible. We start as frequent small feeds, and we will try to give orally, and we give nasogastric feeds only when the child is not able to take orally, or the child is taking orally, but it is less than 80% of what we have targeted to give. So in these two conditions, you give nasogastric, or else you can give oral feeds. So the recommended daily energy and protein intake during the stabilization phase is 100 kilocalorie per kg per day and 1 to 1.5 gram per kg per day. And the total fluid that is recommended is 130 ml per kg per day. If there is edema, then you can decrease it to 100 ml per kg per day. And you should continue breastfeeding ad libitum. So what are the starter diets that we used? We use F75 diets. So F75 diet means that the diet will be providing 75 kilocalorie of energy per 100 ml. And these diets usually provide protein somewhere between 0.9 to 1.2 gram per 100 ml, right? And lactose content also is less during the initial stabilization phase when we are giving F75 diets. So now the F75 diets can be cereal based or they can be milk based. Cereal based again can be of 2 types. So we give starter diets with the help of F75. For catch up, we use F100 diets, which typically provide energy of 101, around 100 kilocalorie per 100 ml, and protein intake of 2.9 gram per 100 ml. And lactose content will be higher because this F100 we are giving during the stabilization phase. So how should we give it? In the initial few days, we should give at 2 hourly frequency. The volume per feed should be around 11 ml per kg. And we should target 130 ml per kg of intake over 24 hours in the first few days. Then over the next 2 to 3 days, we can increase the frequency. We can decrease the frequency so that the child is given feeds every 3 hours. We can increase the volume of each feed. So that will be around 16 ml per kg per feed, but the total volume per day will remain 130 ml per kg. And on 6th day, we can increase the spacing to 4 hourly by increasing the volume of each feed to 22 ml per kg, so that the total volume remains at 130 ml per kg per day. As I told, so the available options are, we can give either F75 milk based or F75 cereal based. So if we are giving milk based, then how should we prepare? We should take 300 ml cow's milk, add sugar 85 grams, oil 30 ml and water 1000 ml. And if we are giving cereal based, then we should add rice 50 grams, sugar 45 grams, oil 30 grams and water 1 liter. Then when we are doing transition from F75 to F100 after the week, we should do this gradual transition over 48 hours. So whenever we are giving F75 at the end of 1 week, we were giving it 8 times a day. F100 we should give 6 times a day. So the frequency here, like the spacing, will have to be increased gradually from 3 hours to 4 hours. The volume of it should be increased. Volume over a day should be increased from 130 ml per kg per day to 200 ml per kg per day. And calorie, the F75 will be providing around 100 kilocalorie per kg per day. When we are giving F100, it will increase to 200 kilocalorie per kg per day. Protein intake, that was initially 1.5 gram per kg per day while giving F75. When we transition to F100 after a week, it will be around 4 to 6 gram per kg per day. So this is increased calorie and protein in order to provide catch-up growth. It's also important to know what are the ready-to-use therapeutic foods. These are nothing but foods which are prepared in such a way so that it can be consumed just like that without even requiring any proper preparations prior to eating, like prior dilution in water. So whenever you do not need to dilute in water, you are automatically eliminating the risk of bacterial contamination, because polluted water you are not using. So ready to use therapeutic foods are foods which can be consumed without diluting in water. It has a nutritional value of around 500 kilocalorie per sachet. It is easily available. It can be distributed to the beneficiary with prior knowledge of quantity distributed and therefore food value. A child on its own without any help can consume it, and it can be used as at home with follow-up from the medical centers. And it offers logistic facilities with an optimized ratio weight per volume. One example of the ready-to-use therapeutic food is the Hyderabad mix or the Murukulu. 120 grams provides 500 kilocalories, and that is made up of wheat, black gram, groundnut flour, and condiments. It is important to provide sensory stimulation and emotional support all throughout, because these children often have delayed mental and behavioral development. So you try to stimulate and encourage the child and provide a cheerful, stimulating environment. Age-appropriate structured play therapy should also be provided for at least 15 to 30 minutes a day. Age-appropriate physical activity should be provided as soon as the child is well enough, and you have to provide tender, loving care. And you have to prepare the child for follow-up after recovery. Now, there is something called primary failure and secondary failure that you have to know. Primary failure is when, despite all these things, the child is not able to gain appetite by day 4. The child fails to start losing edema by day 4, or edema has not completely disappeared even on day 10. And there is failure to gain at least 5 gram per kg per day by day 10. And secondary failure is when the child had started gaining weight. I mean, all these criteria for primary failure were not there. The child was gaining weight adequately. But after that, the child has again shown a failure to gain at least 5 gram per kg per day for 3 consecutive days in the rehabilitation phase. So what can be the possible causes? Inadequate feeding. So probably they're not preparing the feeds properly, night feeds are not being given, or the child is taking but he's vomiting it out. Specific nutrient deficiencies may be present. So in that case, we have to correct those deficiencies. Maybe the child is having some untreated infection like tuberculosis, giardiosis, chronic suppurative otitis media, urinary tract infection, HIV. So we have to look for these infections and treat them. And or there may be psychological problems. So what are the criteria for discharge? The child should be free of infection. The child should be eating at least 120 to 130 kilocalorie per kg per day. There should be a consistent weight gain of at least 5 gram per kg per day for 3 consecutive days. Weight for height should be 90% of the median. There should be no edema. The child's immunization should have been completed, and caretakers have been sensitized to home care. And what advice will you give? You will have to tell them to come for regular follow-up. You have to ensure vaccination and vitamin A administration. Energy dense nutrient foods will have to be provided, so they will have to be sensitized regarding that, and also they have to be sensitized regarding the importance of providing emotional support. Right. So I'll end my talk with this today. If there are any questions, you're welcome.